Okay, very good day to everyone. I'm going to launch my first mini course on my YouTube channel, and this is on the financial independence and retire early movement. And the motivation for this is that we get a lot of maybe some kind of misinformation from financial advisors as well as financial institutions who like to claim that they can help you attain FIRE. And given that I've simultaneously created 5 or 6 videos on this channel that has received very warm welcome from the people who watch my videos. So I thought I'd consolidate all my videos into one and then I add some material into it so that we can have a 1 hour program on the FIRE movement. Okay. So let's begin by talking about learning objectives. All right. There are several objectives that I want to attain when I conduct this program. The first is to help you understand what FIRE is and what actions are required to obtain financial independence. Okay. The second is to understand broadly how people invest to attain FIRE. The third is to know some of the popular variants of FIRE and how local investors can pursue them. And then have a certain understanding as to why authorities and financial institutions may not want to see you successfully attain FIRE. All right. And then before we end, we will talk a little bit about some of the dark side of trying to attain FIRE. And we will end with a look into the future as well as the competition that FIRE have. All right. There are always alternatives on lifestyle design, but I like you guys to be aware of it so that we can compare that against someone who's trying to attain FIRE and successfully attain early retirement. Okay, so without any delay, let's move into our subject matter. Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit about the motivation and the background of the FIRE movement, and you can tell that I use the Squid Game as inspiration for my backdrop. And I think it's very important that somehow I think a lot of us Singaporean workers, we are playing some kind of Squid Game as well. We're just trying to survive, right? And make it until we could maybe successfully draw our CPF life funds. And then along the way, there are all these tiny little games that you play in a very toxic kind of workplace. Okay, so let's talk about why the FIRE movement has gained so much prominence amongst millennials in the past. Okay, so the fact of the matter is that we work for a lot of these workplaces that are bullshit, right? The nature of some of the work is boring, very banal, and jobs become more unstable as you approach your 40s. And now we're seeing software developers in their mid-30s getting displaced, right? Maybe by another software developer with an artificial intelligence. Okay, and AI sort of ensures that whatever expertise that you spend many years trying to build in university, they will quickly degrade over time, all right? As a rookie or an entry-level graduate becomes proficient in artificial intelligence, he can take over the work of maybe more than 2 or 3 senior professionals within the organization, right? So because of this, financial independence becomes a very worthy goal, right? We are trying to race towards the finish line and find an alternative means of getting income before our heads get on the chopping block. All right. So that's basically the objective of financial independence. It is a very, very defensive kind of maneuver. For my generation, I was lucky I can do it proactively. I can work, I can build up passive income at the same time. I can become financially independent. These days, for millennial and a Gen Z, it's a lot more desperate, right? It is a fight to remain relevant and a fight against obsolescence. Okay. All right. So what is the conventional solution to all this, right? The government will tell you that they will create a trampoline to support you, right? No safety net, but a trampoline so that you can bounce back. Okay. Another possible conventional solution is to have 6 to 12 months of living expenses in cash reserves. So if you keep that money, then if you get retrenched, you can use that time to look for another job. Okay. Now, on top of it, now for this generation of workers, there are skill futures credits and their mid-career trading benefits, professional conversion plans for you to reinvent yourself. All right, but still, this is very risky as you arrive in your 50s, and I'm pretty sure companies are not open-minded to hiring someone like me when there are many young workers who are very proficient in AI, and I can imagine a 25-year-old NUS graduate having the skills to replace 4 or 5 workers in their 50s, right? Of course, these workers in their 50s are those that do not know how to use AI. Okay, so this is the kind of problem that we have, right? And so how does the financial independence game work? All right, you have a certain amount of expenses that you can see on the horizontal line, all right? And your aim is to build an asset that generates investment income for you. So over time, this investment income, it could be in the form of a dividend, it could be even be a royalty. All right, it can be a laundromat that's generating revenues for you. Okay, but over time, this investment income grows until it can cover your basic expenses. And once you reach this crossover point, you will gain the freedom to redesign your life, right? In whatever way you want. You can reinvent yourself. You can quit work entirely, and then I'll talk to you about some issues if you were to make that decision. Or it can be like me, right? From an IT engineer, I went back to SMU to get myself a law degree, and I got admitted to the bar, right? And I became a lawyer, all right? But then I didn't really enjoy legal work in family and criminal law, right? Because of my financial independence, I could let it go and become an investment trainer. So this is generally how financial independence works. Okay, and the inspiration for that came from a book called Your Money or Your Life by an author called Vicki Robbins. All right. And it's very important to understand a little bit about Vicki Robbins, right? She's not exactly the kind of people that get into the FIRE movement today. Most of the time, the FIRE movement is conducted by PMETs, right? Professionals, managers, executives, technicians, right? And Vicki Robbins actually was someone who inherited a lot of money, and she worked with a broker, I think called Joe Dominguez, right? Who arrived at this crossover point diagram, which is very similar to what I've drawn for you previously. Okay, which is to reach a point where your monthly investment income exceeds your monthly expenses. All right, and with that, that is what financial independence is all about. So what do you need to do in very general terms to get this FIRE movement up and running for yourself? And there are 3 things that you need to do successfully. Sometimes some other gurus say you only need 2 out of 3, but based on my personal experience, you need to have all 3 in order to succeed in the FIRE movement. Okay, the first is how do we earn more money, right? You need to, within the short term, figure out how to work overtime, maybe find a side hustle, right? And there is a class of self-help books that say that you spend a third of your time working and a third of your time sleeping. So what happens to that 8 hours where you can do whatever you want with your life, right? And the recommendation is maybe you find a side hustle, you find a way to monetize your hobby, and that will decide your financial fate. Okay, so this is not a get-rich-quick scheme. The FIRE movement is a scheme that actually requires that you become more down to earth than what you are previously. So the first and difficult question you need to ask yourself is, how do I increase my top line, right? So for me, and I came from a generation that had an easier time than what young people are going through today, all right? My first job was with Procter & Gamble, and they actually allow IT support professionals to get overtime pay, right? So I was the administrator for the AS400 mid-range servers. I was able to raise my take-home pay then by about 40%, simply by volunteering to do backups over the weekends, right? So I was doing backups twice a week. And then when the contractor for the company resigned, I was spending every weekend back at the data center, just loading tapes, waiting for the backup to run, unloading tapes, okay, making sure the right file is in the system. And to make sure that my time was spent productively, I studied for my CFA, the Chartered Financial Analyst. So I brought the textbooks into the data center, right? Made sure the backups ran properly. And I made more money than my peers, right? Just by showing up, right? Okay, and younger Gen Z workers would need to consider something a lot more drastic, like actually breaching a contract of employment by looking for another employer. And then while working remotely, work with 2 companies at the same time. And This is known as overemployment. And I don't blame young people for doing this because your work is so unreliable that you have no choice, right? You might have to work for multiple employers at the same time, so that when one employer fires you, you still have other sources of income, right? Yeah. So I'm not trying to encourage anybody to breach the contract, okay? But this is what a lot of engineers today, the problems that they face, right? To actually deal with the problem of work being hard to come by, right? It might become an employer's market very soon in Singapore, right? Yeah, so that's practically what I did, and I admit that young people might need to go a lot further than what I did in order to survive. The second thing we need to do is how to figure out how to save more money, right? It's pointless earning more money if you don't have a way of actually reducing your expenses, right? And for me, I spend a lot of meals in the New Tech Park uh, canteen where the Procter& and Gamble data center was. And I ate cai pong there every day. And I moved from 3 meat, 2 vegetables to 2 meat, 1 vegetable. And then eventually I went to 1 meat, 2 vegetables. And then after that, I jumped to vegetarian bihun. And I sort of stopped there because I was able to get a meal down to less than $5 per sitting. But younger generation, they found a much more powerful way to do that. They intermittently fast. So if you intermittently fast, you don't even have to pay for lunch, right? You just need a water cooler, in your workplace, and you're good to go, right? The problem with saving more is the problem of exerting willpower, right? You need willpower in order to be frugal. So if you have to exert willpower, and suffer so much, and you feel that it's so painful to have a lower standard of living, uh, I suggest you don't really go all out. The reason is because it's not sustainable and you really hate your life, and you're more likely to give up the FIRE movement when you do that. Right? For me, I belong to a personality type that I genuinely enjoy a simpler kind of existence, and I'm a little bit contrarian. And I've learned that, in my office, in my first few years of work, the fellow executives, the mainly top students and their CCA leaders who enter Procter and Gamble, they love to talk about their weekends in Bali and scuba diving. And I was very contrarian, right? I didn't like doing that. I think a good weekend should be spent making money in the data center. Okay. Yeah, and so because of that, I'm able to save significantly more than my peers. And the secret weapon, which I'll review later, is that if you can save more for 1 year, you don't need to work so hard, right, in order to get an increment, right? Because your increment can come from your investments. Okay, so my personal killer strategy, okay, is that I was living on $600 a month as an undergraduate. It's a princely sum, all right, princely sum because, to be fair, I didn't have the rags to riches kind of background. My dad is the founder of Pet Lover Center, all right? So as an undergraduate, for my generation, $600 a month as pocket money is very, very high. Okay. Now, because I acknowledge that I had a very, very high kind of pocket money, when I started work with my take home pay of $2,000, right? I continued living on that $600. I never raised my standard of living. And I remember my uncle, who's a high flying partner in an accounting firm, I took his clothes and I wore them to work, right? So I didn't even need to spend money on clothes because as an IT professional, I don't have customer facing roles, right? I just need to be good technically, and that's good enough for me. Okay. I have a ridiculously strange way of tracking my investment expenses. I use the SAF notebook. Those days, we didn't have mobile phones. So I track my expenses by writing in the SAF notebook, the way I was trained as a recruit. And that saved me a lot of money because every small expense required an entry in the SAF notebook. Eventually, it became so leche to do that, so troublesome, that I just refused to buy stuff anymore. It's so tiring to do that, right? And then every week it's manual. I have to sort of sum up my expenses. Yeah, and that was very effective. I think I was able to cut my expenses by a further 10%. Okay. And the last one, which is very drastic, and some people commented on this when I presented this idea, is that I did not date anyone until my monthly passive income exceeded $600, right? I'm a very old-fashioned guy. If I go on a date, I'll pay for my first date, right? If I feel that financially I'm not ready to pay for my first date, I don't date. Okay? Yeah, and it's that kind of attitude with my money such that when I got my $600, I got my first girlfriend. I eventually married my first girlfriend. I mean, I paid for the dates and all that, right? And my wife never worked. She never worked for many years, so I continue to support her, right? Yeah, but I always say that I support her using the investment income rather than my earned income. Okay, so this is actually a very extreme approach. I'm sure young people, you will find your own way of innovating. Okay, even today, I was telling my mom just today that there are three brands that I buy almost exclusively. If it's clothes, it's Uniqlo. If it is swimming trunks and sports equipment, it's Decathlon. And with shoes, I've been a loyal customer with Bata for many years, but I've recently ditched the Bata brand because I wanted more comfortable shoes, and now I'm a fan of Skechers. I go to Malaysia and I try to get a discount, right, whenever I can. Okay, you don't need to succeed in financial independence to really benefit from it, okay? And this is the most important thing about the FIRE movement, okay? If you give up halfway, the income from your investments will still benefit you, right? If you find any phase in your life where you have to spend more money because you become a caregiver, you become a family man, it's okay to stop, but the investment income will keep coming. So you will always feel more abundant than someone that who has to uh, pick up and wait for a paycheck every month. Okay? You can always pick up fire again at a later stage in your life. All right. So it's not a 1 or 0. It's fine if you do not, get financially independent, right? Okay, and that's basically my introduction, the motivation behind the FIRE movement, and what skills you need to know. And actually, with that short little lecture, it's enough to start. But of course, the people who come from my YouTube channel, they want more. They want to say, okay, but what about investing? You've talked about earning your money. You've talked about saving your money. How do I invest my money? All right, and that's what I want to talk about. Okay, now investing is one of the big cornerstones in the FIRE movement. And there is a complicated reason for this. And this is not really done in the FIRE movement. But for me, I'm a big fan of this economist called Thomas Piketty. He's a French economist. Very left-wing, very anti-capitalist. But one of his best ideas is this concept known as R is greater than G. Okay, and what R is greater than G means that the economic growth rate, right, the rate of return on capital, R, is always greater than the economic growth rate, right? Which means that if the rate of return on capital consistently exceeds the economic growth rate, it leads to a concentration of wealth in the hands of those who own capital, increasing income and wealth inequality. When I read this paragraph, I didn't go the way of these left-wing socialists, and I started to believe that you have to take down capitalism, right? Yeah, I'm not like the guy in the Squid Game, right? Uh, I wanted to become a VIP, right? So if this is true, then you're better off not spending your salary, and you should accumulate as much capital as you can, right? Right up to the point where if you need to do intermittent fasting, right, and almost starve yourself, it's still worth it. It's still worth it because it grows faster than your salary, even if you're a top performer in your office. And I've experienced it personally, right? When I was in Procter and Gamble, it's a good company, by the way, I could get an increment of 30% a year. In Hewlett Packard, after I got outsourced, I was top performer for 1 year and I got 6%, right? And I was furious, right? I started plotting my exit after that. Okay, right. So how do we invest for FIRE, right? So FIRE is just an intensive application of three competencies, right? You earn a lot more, you save a lot more, and you invest a lot better, right? And for person in your 20s, investing is probably the least important. But as you reach your 40s and your 50s, because of the rate of compounding, it becomes the most important. So there are two general approaches to investing for FIRE, and I'm going to go through them one by one. Okay. And before I start on the first approach, I just a casual reminder that I'm sure you're the kind of person that follows a lot of financial gurus, right? The most important concept in the world, the financial concept in the world, is obviously compound interest, right? Einstein calls it the eighth wonder of the world, and it's what allows you to exponentially grow your wealth, all right? And you can read up independently on the rule of 72, right? And that's something that everybody needs to understand about compound interest. Okay, and how do we exploit compound interest to fire faster, right? One technique is through exchange traded funds or ETFs. Okay, and the first method is to allocate your assets to a globally diversified balanced portfolio. And there are two ETFs that can get the job done: the Vanguard Total World Stock Index Fund, or VT, or the bond equivalent, which is the Vanguard Total World Bond Fund, VNDW. If you allocate 60% to the equity fund, 40% to the bond fund, you will get about 8 to 9% returns every year. But the important thing is that you get a standard deviation of 11.26. The risk is relatively low. Okay, and more importantly, if you do this, very hard to make a mistake. If you time your purchase wrongly and you sell everything at the market bottom, your maximum drawdown is 20%. Safe, uncontroversial, and this can win by very, very low expenses of 0.05. Now, why is it important for me to come out with these numbers and share with you? It's because when you have financial advisors talking about FIRE, blasting into Facebook on a day-by-day basis, they will tell you how to get FIRE, but they don't share their numbers with you. They can't tell you over the past 10 years what their returns are, what their standard deviation is, right? And most importantly, they'll never tell you what the expenses are, right? Its expenses are extremely high, right? Maybe 2 to 3%, right? So if you're able to learn and internalize the value of this slide, right, and do this yourself, right, you will have expenses as low as 0.05%, okay? And that will make you immune to these pitches from financial advisors in the future, right? So that's the bottom line, right? If you learn this, you don't need to ever listen to a financial advisor again, right? Unless maybe you want to buy term life insurance or something else. Okay, so try to internalize this slide. Okay, and once you're able to understand that it's a 60-40 portfolio involving 60% equities and 40% bonds, then you can always find a way to fine-tune your ETFs, right? And there are several ways to do this. You can look at this thing called UCITS. These are globally diversified ETFs on the London Stock Exchange that can reduce your withholding taxes. Okay, you can look for an accumulating ETF that automatically reinvests your dividends. Okay, and a great way of managing your withdrawals is to simply look at your portfolio every year and then remove 2.5% of it and spend it however way you want. Okay, so that you can enjoy yourself, but your portfolio still has the ability to grow year by year. Okay, so that is in a very nutshell the first technique that I think is useful for people who want to start the FIRE movement and maybe accept it into your lives, right, as an idea. Okay. Okay, so here are the pros and cons of this approach, right? The pro is that it's highly diversified, it is low cost, decent returns without any stock picking effort, very, very low risk. Okay. Now, the cons is that it's not really passive because every year you have to go to your broker, you have to sell, right? You have to sell 2.5% of your portfolio. And that's very fiddly, right? Do you sell 2.5% from the bond or the equity component, right? I mean, you have to learn how to do rebalancing in order to know where to withdraw your funds, right? And emotionally, it's simply not satisfying to go in and sell something because it means that, well, the money is not working for me anymore, right? Yeah. So this ETF approach requires a certain amount of willpower and conscientiousness. Okay, I think it's highly effective, but you just need to have the kind of very stubborn, very conscientious, very reliable kind of personality to get this to work for you, right? And the world turns on the fortunes of conscientious men. All right, so you conscientious people have a very has a very large advantage in life. Okay, yeah. All right. So that's our first approach. Now, before we dive into the second approach, let's talk about the second most important financial concept in the world, and that's not documented anywhere. You learn this from me. Okay. And the second most important financial concept in the world is that a large sum of money can be converted into an infinite sequence of smaller payments. So if you have $1 million in cash invested at an asset that returns 4% every year, it means that you're getting $40,000 every year forever. Forever. Okay? That's the second most important concept because if you have a lump sum of money, right, and you don't need to spend this lump sum immediately, right, your role is to convert it into an infinite sequence so that for the rest of your life and hopefully for the rest of your children's life, they will be well fed. And this is what rich people implicitly understand, right? This is the reason why wealthy people set up all these trusts, for their children. And these trusts, they don't allow them to last longer than 100 years. Okay, yeah, because that's how the rich get richer. Okay, all right, and in order to exploit that, the second method is obviously dividends investing. Okay, the second method is to buy stocks that give a high dividend. Simply pick about 20 to 60 dividend stocks from different industries that provide 5% dividend yields for you. Okay, and you want them to have a sustainable free cash flow and hopefully a low payout ratio. Okay, and you can refer to some of the videos that I've created on the channel about REITs and banks, and there'll be plenty of material on that, right? And a lot of you come to my channel for that. Okay, and you can have a safe portfolio that can pay dividends throughout the year. Okay, you need a system to fine-tune the dividend strategy. Okay, my program with my students for the early retirement masterclass focuses on that. So we subset dividend stocks with low volatility, a low payout ratio, or high free cash flow, right? Otherwise, minimizing brokerage fees can also help. Okay, but for me, I pay more to get my stocks in CDP. Portfolio turnover is very low. Okay, all right. And if you want to spend your dividends, the best approach is to spend half of it and use the other half to buy more dividend stocks, right? So that's how my family finances work. We wait for the dividends to come in. Our basic expenses will use up half the dividends, and then the dividends then go back to buy more high yielding dividend stocks in the local stock market. And we can do this hopefully infinitely, right? And my children can be financially dependent before their first day at work. All right, so let's talk a little bit more about how do we build a rookie dividend portfolio. If you now just remember that the three stocks I mentioned here is for you to build a diversified dividend portfolio, but three stocks is not enough. But as I explained before, sometimes people just want to know what to buy, and I'm just sharing with you. If I'm cornered in a cocktail party and people force me to throw out some names of some stocks, this is what I will say, right? But this is not necessarily what I have a lot in my portfolio because my portfolio is 60 stocks. So three stocks is obviously not enough. But if you want to ask me what is the minimum effective dose to maybe get $50 to $100 every month from local stocks, this is my answer to you. Okay. So first is obviously DBS, is Singapore's largest bank. It has the highest projected return on equity across these three banks, highest dividend yield, does well when interest rates go up, okay, and can rely on wealth management fees when interest rates go down. Fairly defensive, right? And you're familiar with DBS, most of you. The second is Fraser Centrepoint Trust, which specializes in suburban malls like Causeway Point. It was very robust during the pandemic because of the supermarkets in these malls. And among the blue chip REITs, Fraser Centrepoint Trust is occasionally the REIT with the lowest volatility, right? There is some risk about people going to JB for more retail and some risk about cinemas shutting down. But generally speaking, Fraser Centrepoint Trust has been a very, very reliable REIT in my portfolio. And I'm still increasing my holdings in this particular REIT. And finally, there's Netlink NBN Trust, which is a business trust. They operate, build, and maintain fiber networks in Singapore. It's affected by higher interest rates and prices set by regulators. There is some policy risk, but super stable business that is boring and it lacks drama. Okay. Now, if you were to look at the correlation between all these three counters, you find that the correlation is very low. So you find that these three stocks, they don't go up and down together at the same time. And that's what we want, right? If you only have three stocks in your portfolio, it lacks diversification. And your best defense is to make sure that the correlations between these counters are very low, lower than the correlation between US stocks and bonds in some like various market regimes. All right. So this is just an objective justification on why these three stocks have been chosen, right? If you look at the performance, they have doubled the performance compared to the STI if you buy them with equal shares, and they do this with the same amount of risk. All right, and as a consequence of this, the Sharpe ratio is particularly high at 0.8. All right, and so returns are excellent. Okay, based on around the time where this slide is being made. All right. Okay, so that summarizes the pros and cons of the dividends approach. The pros is that it's emotionally satisfying, as the portfolio will put money in your account to encourage you to persist during bad times. And that's very important, right? If it rewards you with money on a regular basis, you're more likely to continue investing and surviving through a downturn and then waiting for the markets to recover, right? If you use the ETF approach and it crashes, even though it might be a superior approach from a returns risk perspective, it's harder to hold on to your investment because you get demoralized, right? Yeah, that's the most important thing when you're talking about dividends investing, all right? Emotionally, as a form of psychology, it is superior, okay? All right? So, and the cool thing is you are a shareholder and you can go to the AGMs and you can fight over the buffets with all the uncles and aunties. Okay? And the downside is that it requires more monitoring, it requires stock selection. Okay? And in Singapore, you end up spending based on your quarterly payouts. Okay? And it can also underperform because dividends don't do well all the time. There will be 1 or 2 year stretches where dividends will underperform. And you see other things like growth stocks and tech stocks outperform, right? And you just need to be able to stomach this and then get on with your lives, okay? And the thing is that as a trainer for dividend stocks, there has been a long period of time, like years, where folks like me get made fun of by even other Dr. Wealth trainers, right? When it is not the popular form of investing, all right? But the bottom line is that, hey, I'm still in the trading business, right? So that's the power of dividends for you. Okay, so how much do you need, all right, to build a portfolio for FIRE? We just need to understand this equation where your portfolio size multiplied by your dividend yield is the amount of extra income that you're going to have, right? So if you rearrange the terms, you take your extra annual income and you divide by the dividend yield, this is how much you need, okay? So for example, if you have a local stock portfolio and it provides 5% dividends and you need 2,000 a month to live on, right? So how much do you need? 2,000 multiplied by 12 divided by 0.05, or you need $480,000 to attain financial independence. Okay, so that's basically it, right? For most of us, if you're single, you need $500,000 invested in a portfolio that gives you a 5% dividend. And generally speaking, you can declare financial independence straight away. All right. Yeah, but this is still a very difficult hurdle to reach, right? Having $480,000 of savings can be quite hard, right? But I do suggest that you try to start with a portfolio of $24,000, and that will get you $100 a month. Okay, and this should be your first target. Save $2,000 every month, and you'll be able to save $24,000 over a year. And the $100 every month that you will get would give you the ability to subscribe to Netflix, Disney Plus, and Prime Video, and increase the quality of your life slightly. Yeah, so that's basically the bottom line. All right, don't try to go for FIRE and aim for $500,000 immediately. You will become very depressed. Okay, aim to get $24,000 within 1 calendar year and increase your salary by $100 every month. Okay, you need to get to this point before you can be encouraged to go further in the FIRE journey. Okay, all right, so we're done with the investment segment of our training. So now let's go through some of the variants of FIRE. All right. Now, the fact of the matter is that FIRE is actually very challenging to achieve because you need $500,000 in order to get somewhere, right? So a lot of people, especially those without a local degree, or you might not be well credentialed in Singapore, you know that there is a certain amount of bias against you, and that your salary outcomes will not be as good as, for example, the people who have a local degree, get into a management associate program, is in software development, all right, or is a lawyer or a doctor. Okay, so some people come up with variants of FIRE that are a lot easier to achieve, right? And what are these variants? The first variant is Barista FIRE. Sorry, it's covered the word Barista, B-A-R-I-S-T-A. Barista FIRE. It blends early retirement with active work. So what you do is that you don't get as much money from your dividend income, but you get enough to supplement a less demanding job, such as becoming a barista, right? And this is easier to achieve than FIRE, often requiring portfolios that are only half the size. Okay, so for example, if you need $1,000 a month with a safe rate of withdrawal of 4%, then your portfolio size is $300,000. So you can use $300,000 to get $1,000 every month in passive income. And then you change your lifestyle, you do something else with your life, right? If a hospital nurse who earns $4,500 wants a job with no shift work, she joins a private clinic that pays $3,500, and the portfolio of $300,000 can generate the $1,000 to cover the pay difference. Okay, all right. And so what the hospital nurse can do is maybe volunteer for more overtime as well, so that one day, you can actually, jump to a private clinic and not have a dip in your standard of living. All right. So this is how you can apply Barista FIRE in a practical way. Okay. The next variant is Coast FIRE. And Coast FIRE is actually a very different way of looking at your life, right? You just want to save enough to fund your retirement at the usual time. In other words, if your CPF special account has about $300,000, it will be able to fund an average 65-year-old and provide a lifestyle with basic dignity, right? So all you have to do is use CPF transfers, make voluntary contributions until your CPF special account has $300,000. Then you don't have to plan for retirement anymore. You can go through the rest of your life, work until you're 65 years old, and spend whatever you earn with a little bit of emergency cash savings until then. And you can go on life in a fairly comfortable way. All right. So this is for people that actually hate retirement planning. You want to get it out of the way as early as possible so that you don't have to think so much about it, right? And these people often have very nice, very enjoyable, Instagrammable kind of lives, right? Yeah, and so Coast FIRE can naturally be enabled by your CPF, okay? The basic expenses for a 65-year-old is about 1,600 in today's dollars, so about 300 to 350K today in your CPF special account. It means that you've attained full retirement sum, all right? And you can move on with having a very enjoyable youth, all right, until you're 65 years old. right? Also very good for people who actually do enjoy their work and you're not in a toxic workplace. So why don't you pursue coast fire? Okay. All right. So what are the mechanisms for coast fire? Right. You can transfer ordinary account to special account, and you can earn your money at 4% instead of 2.5%. Right. But you can only do it up to the full retirement sum. Okay. You can employ your retirement sum top-up scheme. So if you have less than your full retirement sum, you can basically take your bonus every year and you can transfer $8,000 into your CPF special account, right? And there's a tax deduction, so it's very effective, right? And finally, you have the supplementary retirement scheme, right? You can put up to $15,300 into your SRS, invest it in the local stocks I mentioned earlier, right? And then you're able to come up with a larger amount of retirement savings to lock down, right, your expenses, to lock down and make sure that you succeed when you are 65 years old. Okay. All right, do note that Coast Fire and Barista Fire can be done at the same time because Coast Fire is largely a CPF exercise. In Singapore, Barista Fire is basically growing a dividend portfolio. If you're pursuing fire, right, you normally have to do Coast Fire and Barista Fire at the same time, right, before you can reach fire. Okay, so once Barista Fire is attained, then you can decide whether you want to attain full fire. Okay, and you should always set your life like a project, right? Try to get maybe Barista Fire first, then Coast Fire, and then later on, you can go for this advanced form of fire called Fat Fire. Okay, which I'm going to talk about next. The third variant of fire is Fat Fire, and this is a very extreme form of financial independence that prioritizes a luxurious lifestyle. That means you're not really going for bare minimum to survive the toxic workplace. You want a good life. So the lowest level start with a passive income of 10,000 a month, and it may require about $3 million to start, right? So mainly for successful professionals who are not really genuine about the FIRE movement. Maybe they want to fit into the FIRE movement and talk about FIRE and investing. But generally, these are very successful people, right? And financial independence for them is a sword and not a shield, all right? It's to reinforce their egos, okay? And I have to admit, right, it's obvious I'm an investment trainer. I hold multiple jobs. I'm financially independent. My family can live on my dividends. But I'm doing all this because maybe one day I can attain Fat Fire as well. In fact, I'm not too far away. Yeah, I'm like maybe if I can rent out one room in my house, I Fat Fire straight away, right? Yeah, but that's not the point, right? Yeah, so I don't really take Fat Fire people very seriously. Okay. Yeah, because they might be too successful to understand the problems people are facing in the workplace. Okay. All right. Now we're going to go into the more politically incorrect topics, right? Why institutions may not like the idea of fire. Okay, and there's reason for me to say this because in the Seedly Personal Finance Festival in April 2024, Minister of Manpower Tan See Leng opened with a salvo that, instead of fire, why not have fire in the belly? And then he goes on to talk about career conversion, right? He's a very good manpower minister. I support him. Okay, but I can tell that authorities are not really very open-minded for young Singaporeans to desperately want to use passive income to get out from the workforce, right? So I can understand that they are concerned. The second incident is when Money Sense on April 24th mysteriously created a comic strip that talks about a person who gave up his fire journey, and they spend a lot of time emphasizing that it is okay to do so. So actually, I'm not being paranoid here. You can assess the news and you can decide for yourself why authorities don't want you to fire, right? Of course, it's not just authorities. They might feel that, if younger Singaporeans keep aiming to retire, there might not be enough people to power the economy because we're not creating enough babies anyway, right? The people who practice fire engage in a highly austere kind of lifestyle, which may dampen consumption, right? And if the idea catches on in Singapore society, people will stop spending money and there might be a collapse in the economy. Okay, but I think the government is fine I think financial institutions are terrified of the FIRE movement because part of the FIRE movement, and I think it's very important in the FIRE movement, is that you wisen up about your personal finance and you figure out ways to buy equities and stocks direct from a low-cost broker. So they will not be able to earn wealth management fees from people in the FIRE movement, right? So I think collectively, financial institutions and authorities really don't want you to really get into the movement. Okay. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about why these authorities are wrong. Okay. One of the harsh truths is that attaining FIRE is very hard. There is a bias towards high earning professionals like medical doctors, software engineers, lawyers. And your baseline monthly dividend of $2,000 would require $600,000 in investment assets, right? The journey for a local graduate from a top 3 university can take 8 to 15 years. Okay, I took about 7 years because I started almost immediately upon graduation, right? But I've only pressed the retirement button after about 14 years of work, right? So the journey takes a long time. People who practice it often outperform at work, okay, which actually benefits MNCs and local firms over the short term. Okay, and most people in the FIRE movement are actually highly engaged in their work. We don't do the 假料 B, or just wait for a paycheck month by month. We are always finding a way to learn more things, how to contribute and do better, so that you can climb faster in your company, and you have to job hop in order to get like regular increments. So I don't think the authorities have anything to worry about the motivation of people who jump into this movement, right? It is not the same as lying flat, which I will talk about later on, right? The other thing is that over the years, I figured out that there are only a few personality types that dominate the forums that aspire to the FIRE movement. The largest group is INTJ. Okay, the rest, ENTJ like me, ISTJ and ESTJs. All right, so they're all highly logical and highly conscientious people. Okay, and you often need that rare combination of high intelligence and high conscientiousness to be able to work hard and then simultaneously build a portfolio, backtest it, have very deep discussions about how to build a diversified portfolio and rebalance it, and then go back to work the next day as maybe a lawyer, a doctor, or software engineer, and then outperform in your field, right? So these are the only few people that would actually succeed in a reasonable amount of time, right? But of course, hat tip to the INTJs. I'm not an INTJ, although as I get older, I am becoming more introverted. I am obviously extroverted for my age because I have a YouTube channel. I love showing off, right? Okay, so yeah, so INTJs are particularly good at strategizing and succeeding in the FIRE movement because they're introverted. They're more likely to press the button and retire because generally they hate people. Okay. And I think that if the authorities do not like Singaporeans engaging in the FIRE movement, the solution is not to discourage FIRE, but to actually create a workplace that is actually worth going to. All right. Work provides more than money. It is a source of meaning. It is a source of identity and a place to make friends. Okay, because there's so many toxic workplaces. People come to me to teach them early retirement, right? So that they're not beholden to some tyrannical bosses. I have graduated 700 students. Everybody has a sad story to tell in the office. Maybe a paper general stole your idea, right? Maybe you are stabbed by a rival at work. Maybe you're not recognized for your hard work over a year, right? These are very common stories that Singaporeans face. And the only way out of this is through financial independence because let's face it, when you change a company, the faces change, but the attitudes, the behaviors are the same. Okay? All right, so now we've had a discussion about authorities and FIRE. Let's really talk about the genuine downsides of FIRE, right? I've gone through the FIRE movement. I have noticed people's change in their attitudes towards me, and I've been doing this for a very long time, right? So my history was that I became a best-selling personal finance author first. My first book, Growing Your Tree of Prosperity, was number 10 for 1 week in the non-fiction Straits Times Booksellers Index. The book's best-selling list, right? And And there was hate mail. There are people talking about me that knew me in university. The people that hated me in university showed up to flame me. And then the people who are my fans that I worked with as an electrical engineer, they defended me, right? There was a lot of negativity and there was a lot of positivity, right? So I know the good side and the bad side, but my personality has always been there's no such thing as bad publicity, right? So I lapped it all in. Okay, but for most of you who successfully fire, you realize that your passive income will exceed your regular expenses. Okay, likely because you have an above average career. And not only do you have an above average career, I suspect it is because with investment expertise, you have strong quantitative skills, you have some business acumen. In other words, you're not just an engineer, you know that, hey, you know what's driving the top line, what's driving the bottom line. And so, actually, if you pursue fire, you actually become a better worker. You might be promoted at work a lot more, right? Yeah, but there is a dark side, right? So what is the dark side? The first dark side is you will lose your friends, right? If word gets out that you're financially independent, like a lot of rich people, you will lose the right to complain about your problems. Your problems are always small. There's nobody to listen to you. Unless you pay money to a therapist, your friend who has a boss barking at him every day, he's not going to listen to you talk about maybe your marital problems or your kids underperforming at school, right? Because to them, you might already be a winner and you're making them look bad, right? So you're likely going to lose friends over time. Now, this is important because when men come together, they form these hierarchical groups. And conventionally, for a man, your status is tied to your income every year, right? It's tied to your annual income. But we derive so much money from our investments that you don't know how to slot them on the totem pole. Like for me, I'm always the unemployed guy when I hang out with my JC friends and my secondary school friends. How do you peg the guy that's unemployed, right? In some other groups that I go to, I do threaten their position, right? And a lot of people misunderstand FIRE. Unless you are my fan and you know me on YouTube, you watch my videos. I sound like a con man, right? Yeah, it's true. I think that when I was starting out trying to build an identity around it, and it was actually a lot more difficult because I teach investing under Dr. Wealth. There are these vibes, right? And there are these people. There are genuine con men in the financial trading industry, in Singapore. All right, yeah, so it's actually harder for me to make friends, and I'm totally aware of that. All right, okay, but losing friends is a natural process. As you get your shit together and you rise in society, some people need to be let go. All right, and I think I have lost more friends than maybe most of the listeners that you have, and I'm consciously aware of it. I don't run away from it, and feel free to talk about it on the comment section. Okay, so this is the first thing I want you to realize. Okay, and even if you want to hang out with the guy might not want to hang out with you. Okay, so you will lose your friends. Second is that your social life might suffer. Now, for the folks who fire early in your life, you find that your close friends are still stuck on a 9 to 5 kind of grind. So your spare time, you can spend it with your wife, you can spend it with your kids, but you don't have a pool of friends to hang out with you. So for me, I'm fortunate because I'm in my 50s and my friends are also trying to ramp down on the amount of work they do. Some are doing a little bit of lifestyle design, maybe going to a job, with less stress. Okay. And so if you don't have friends who are retired, you're actually quite lonely. And actually early retirement is a network good, right? It is only good if you have other friends who are retired to hang out with you, to travel with you, right? So I can't hang out with the people in their 60s and 70s because listening to them makes me want to strangle a boomer. All right. The only boomer I want to listen to is my mom. I'm not interested in listening to any other boomer. So I mean as a poly lecturer as well, I love talking to Gen Z and millennials, and I feel young when I talk to them. So I prefer to talk to people with dreams, right? I don't like talking to people who are cynical, who may be on their way out. And so one thing I've learned is hanging out with boomers makes me cranky as well. So I try to avoid them. Okay, all right. So this is a network good. I mean, have the patience to wait for your friends to retire, and soon enough you have a bunch of people to hang out with. All right. And thirdly, which is a little bit philosophical here, you need to fill an existential vacuum, right? When you give up your work identity is normally highly invested, right? In my final job, I was in a statutory board, working on a government website. So I didn't invest a lot in that work identity because I hated that identity, right? But prior to that, I was an IT governance professional, and I actually liked that identity at that time, right? What role do you play in society once you solve your financial problems? That's something you want to ask yourself. Is there a way for you to do some pro bono work, volunteer in a community center? You need to work it out. And you need to work it out while you're holding on to your job. So don't press the retirement button yet, figure this out. Okay? How do you maintain your relevance in society today? When you stop becoming a manager, people will stop listening to you, right? You need to carve a new identity out of it. I'm lucky because I'm an individual contributor, right? And the one which I never really solved was how do you introduce or explain to yourself to other people, right? Yeah. So in my last high school gathering, some seniors in Swiss Scottish Secondary School asked me what I do. And I didn't think I had a good answer to it. I said I was an IT professional. I became a lawyer. Then I became a private investor. And I'm an investment trainer, you know. And the moment I left the table, right, my buddy told me that the women on the table immediately jumped on him and said, "Is this guy for real? Did he inherited his money?" Yeah. So yeah, I mean, what kind of identity do you want to have, right? You gotta like sort these things out. Okay. So there are some practical issues after you fire, and this is something that you really need to address. Okay, no work means no notice of income assessment from IRAS, which is required for home mortgage repricing or application for credit cards. All right, remember that. This is practical. It's very important. If there are income tax rebates or deductions, you can't benefit from them without income, right? As an NS man and a family man, I have a certain $8,000 to $9,000 of deduction every year, all right, where I don't have to pay taxes on it, right? It's wasted if I don't have an income, all right? 4% coming from CPF special account can only be earned before age 55 because CPF special account disappears at the age of 55. So if you want to earn risk-free money and have a CPF special account, you have to somehow engage yourself in work up to the age of 55. All right. And finally, you will eventually lose touch with ordinary people. And my fear is I can't hold a proper discussion about the latest developments in the workplace. Although I read a lot of the economists, right? I'm not really like when I went for an internship as a law student, I have to use this tool called Slack, which is like WhatsApp for companies, right? Even up to today, I never understood why can't we just form a WhatsApp group? Why do we use Slack, right? Yeah, so things like this, right? You become very out of touch, right? And I'm as good as a fresh graduate if I were to find a job in AI, which I'm actually trying to do, right? Now, there is a solution to all this, right? If you do have the luxury of time and money, it's okay to do some work, and this is exactly what I'm doing, right? I'm a multi-hyphenate. I conduct an early retirement masterclass. I have an all-weather portfolio course that teaches students how to use Python Jupyter notebooks to trade in the markets. I have an artificial intelligence course for primary school students, right? To teach them how to use artificial intelligence to learn. Okay, and I am an adjunct law lecturer with Temasek Polytechnic, right? So I'm working, right? Almost like full-time work like you, all right? And I run this YouTube channel, and it will monetize one day if you listen to this, okay? So there is an optimal point of work-life balance, right? If you start from 0 hours of work, you can increase the amount of work until you're satisfied with your life, right? But if you already have a job, your boss is not going to let you reduce the amount of work for less pay so that you can have more time with leisure. So I think that is the kind of advantage that FIRE have for you. So you only disengage after you have a critical mass of friends who can hang out with you during office hours. Okay? Right. So I think in spite of being in the FIRE movement, there is a rationale to focus on financial independence and postpone early retirement. Postpone, or not don't do it, postpone. That being said, introverts have an easier time retiring from the workforce. Extroverts like me, I'm sorry, you have to continue finding ways to get attention, to reinvent yourself, run the business, make a bigger dent in the universe. Right? Absolutely nothing wrong with that. If you're trying to understand what I do, then just say something on the comment section. Right? Okay, and now this is the final section, and it's totally new. It's not a repeated slide from my previous slides. I'd like to talk a little bit about the future of FIRE. And the future of FIRE is that FIRE is always competing. We're always fighting against other models of living, right? That Gen Z and the younger generation, they come out with. Okay? And FIRE itself is challenging and biased. It is biased towards professionals with median income from good local degrees, right? If you come from a private university, it's going to be a lot more difficult for you to succeed in the FIRE movement, and you need to find some other alternative to it. So the first alternative is obviously lying flat, right? The Chinese have invented Tangping, or lying flat, which is a mindset where I reject social pressures and I don't really care about my career advancement or material success, right? It could be getting a low wage for basic subsistence, and there are many variants around the world, right? The Great Resignation in the US during the pandemic is one of the variants of lying flat. And the problem with the lying flat movement is that you may not have the resources to deal with emergencies and life's downside when it occurs. Like these Chinese guys, they're lying flat. Most of them have no siblings, right? And they have two parents. So if their parents fall sick, what happens? Right? I mean, the good thing is that they can become a caregiver, but what if it requires a little bit of medical attention? It requires money, right? So lying flat can or cannot work. Not very practical in Singapore. Okay. The second is what I'm trying to do, multi-hyphenated portfolio careers. And you notice that Gen Z is very good at it. They engage in multiple roles and skills at the same time, right? The problem with this is that there are always issues with payments, chasing people for money, making sure that the money comes in. I just want to make sure I don't work for free, right? I don't need the money, but I still expect to get paid. Okay, and it can burn you out if you stretch for a very long time. And there's a lot of juggling. Okay, so for extroverts, you can try this, but if you're an introvert, not a good idea. Okay. Third is business ownership. You don't necessarily have to use FIRE at all if you know how to get into a franchise and learn how to run a business. I think recently there's a very inspirational story about a guy that I think is running several 7-Eleven outlets now. He started with a capital of only $20,000. That is so cool, right? And I think if young people do that, my kids do that, they will have my support all the way, right? Alternatively, you can buy a business from an aged founder and run it yourself. I think people need to be open-minded to this idea, right? Look for an old-fashioned business. Founder is retiring. Children are all professionals. Buy the business, run it for yourself, right? And I think it's better than an MBA, right? And you can consider doing that. There are many books on it, like Main Street Millionaire by Cody Sanchez. I love that book. I was very inspired by the book, all right? Now, the obvious problem with this is that you're risking your capital, and the risk is much larger than investing in the stock markets, right? Alternative number 4 is actually the subject of a video I wanted to do, but it's super commuting. And this is very similar to Joe Arbitrage, where Singaporeans can continue to work in Singapore, but they live in Bangkok. So you rent out your flat, and then you buy an apartment in a cheaper area in other parts of ASEAN. You fly back to Singapore for key meetings. Now, based on the Channel News Asia article, because you have to fly, your savings wouldn't be very high, but your cost of living might still go down by 20%, right? So it's cheaper to live in Thailand and then fly back to Singapore to work, right? So I'm looking at this very carefully. I think this is exceptionally cool. I think more Singaporeans need to try this out. And in my early retirement masterclass, I make my students research the cost of living of neighboring countries to figure out whether they can retire on a portfolio of $500,000. So for the latest batch of my students, right, you will find that the cost of living for Thailand and KL is very much the same, right? So actually between Thailand or KL, you have relatives in KL, you might as well live in KL and then fly back, right? It's probably cheaper to do that. Okay, 1 year of expat expenses in KL is about 16,500 Singapore dollars, and in Thailand is about the same. All right. Of course, in places like Bali, right, which is the last column, my head is blocking Bali. Bali is actually twice as expensive thanks to the digital nomads who are settling down there, right? And of course, Australia and New Zealand, it's not feasible to use fire to attain that kind of lifestyle in these countries. Often, you need to fire in Singapore, and then you'll be able to comfortably fire in Australia and New Zealand, right? And then they'll tax you to death, right? They'll tax you to death through the dividends taxes, right? And if you're interested in doing this, come to my preview, and I will be able to talk a little bit more, right? So I incorporate these concepts of geo arbitrage into my training. Okay, so we've come to the end of this short lesson, slightly more than an hour. Okay, let's talk about what we've learned, all right? The FIRE movement attempts to resolve many of the problems of the workplace by turning workers into landlords or shareholders. When an employee starts finding an alternative way to lead or support himself, you're no longer required to tolerate a toxic work environment, right? Now, to FIRE, you have to develop skills, right? Skills in investing based on your preference. And generally speaking, you can either be an ETF investor or dividends investor. These two investment approaches are particularly suited for the role of enabling FIRE, right? Now, because this often equips employees with enlightenment, financial skills, and knowledge, the financial industry is obviously terrified of the FIRE movement, as it will surely lead to lower profits, right? And FIRE is often a very unconventional approach to life. If you succeed, you are going to lose your friends, and you are going to attract a lot of skepticism to those who are close to you, all right? I've been through it. We can talk about it further, okay? But it's something that I still have to address day to day, right? And there are identity issues post-employment, right? What kind of identity do we want to assume post-employment? That's very hard, all right? Nevertheless, in spite of all these problems, the pursuit of FIRE is a worthy one, even if you fail in attaining this within your lifetime. We've come to the end of my lesson. If you want to learn more, obviously, right, you should subscribe to my content. There'll be more mini courses, but I can't do it so often, right? I'm probably going to do one on the local stock market very soon. I run a 5-day course on early retirement, providing more details on how to invest in the markets. You can come to my preview by searching for ERM intro, clicking on the first link, and then making a registration and then coming for my talk. And then I will catch you live for about 1.5 hours under Dr. Well. All right. That's all I have for you. Thank you very much.